Part 1, the Ghost Nebula was a liar, painting the void with ethereal veils of soft lilac and emerald green, while hiding knives in its folds. Here, in the churning dust and ionized hydrogen, sensors screamed phantom signals, and targeting locks were a prayer at best. It was a perfect hunting ground. Captain Eva Rostova stood on the cramped command deck of the scout killer corvette Stiletto, her form a silhouette against the crimson glow of the tactical holo display. Her ship was running cold, every non-essential system powered down, a whisper of metal and malice drifting through the cosmic dust. They were hunting the so-called Corsairs of the Veil, a pack of privateers who had been preying on human colony supply lines for the better part of a year, their attacks growing bolder with each successful raid. Rostova knew they weren't simple pirates. Piracy was for profit. This was too systematic, too focused. This was a message sent by a hand that preferred to remain hidden. The Stellar Consortium, the ancient and impossibly wealthy alliance of corporate houses that saw humanity's sudden, explosive expansion not as the rise of a new power, but as a pest infestation in their meticulously cultivated garden. The consortium never fought wars. They arranged market corrections and sponsored regional stability actions. Rostova's family on the colony world of Cygnus X1 had been caught in one such correction a decade ago. She remembered the clean, white ships of House Valerius hanging in orbit, not firing a shot, simply enforcing a blockade that starved 1 million people into submission. Now, she was the correction. Targeting solution is degrading. Captain, Lieutenant Jax, her executive officer, murmured from the sensor station. His voice was a low rumble, the sound of gravel and pragmatism. This soup is playing hell with our gravimetric scanners. They could be 10,000 kilometers away or 10. Rostova didn't take her eyes off the display, where 3 faint signatures flickered like dying embers. They're closer. They think their numbers give them courage. They think we're a lost freighter. The Corsairs flew repurposed mining barges, retrofitted with plasma cannons and kinetic launchers. They were loud, clumsy, and effective against unarmed civilians. The Stiletto was different. Humanity hadn't had centuries to perfect shield technology or build grand, city-sized battleships. Their ships were built around a single, brutal philosophy: a bigger engine, a bigger gun, and the willingness to get close enough to make sure the enemy saw your face before they died. Engine room reports the primary capacitor is at 100%. Jax relayed, ready for burn and fire sequence on your mark. Eva took a slow breath, feeling the familiar hum of the ship's gravitic drive thrum through the deck plates beneath her boots. It was a vibration that felt like a caged predator waiting to be unleashed. The Corsairs were moving in a loose arrowhead formation, confident their jamming screen made them invisible. They were wrong. Rostova and her crew didn't need to see them. They just needed to know where the nebula was thickest, where a ship would have to push hardest to move. They listened for the engine noise, the faint ripple in space-time that no jammer could hide. "Bring us to heading 015, Mark II, she ordered, her voice calm and clear. "Full burn. Target their lead ship, the Gilded Claw. I want our first shot to be their eulogy. Fire control. Slave the primary railgun and the forward sandcasters to my command." The ship lurched as the engines ignited, a sudden, violent shove that pressed the crew into their seats. The Stiletto ripped through the nebula's veil, its sleek, dark hull emerging from the dust like a shark from the depths. On the Corsair flagship's bridge, alarms would be screaming. The ghost signal they'd been casually tracking had just resolved into a Terran military-grade energy signature moving at an impossible velocity. It was too late. "Mark," Eva said. The word clipped and cold, A pillar of incandescent light erupted from the stiletto's spine as the magnetic accelerator launched a 20-kilogram tungsten slug at a significant fraction of the speed of light. The round was dumb, a simple application of overwhelming kinetic force, and it needed no guidance system. It crossed the distance between the ships in less than a second. The Gilded Claw's shields flared, a brilliant bubble of energy that held for a nanosecond before collapsing under the sheer, raw violence of the impact. The tungsten penetrator tore through the ship's forward command section, ripping through decks and bulkheads, its momentum atomizing everything in its path before it exited through the aft engine block. The Corsair vessel didn't explode in a cinematic fireball, it simply broke apart, its two halves continuing to drift forward as a cloud of frozen atmosphere and shattered debris erupted from the wound. Before the other two Corsair ships could even process their leader's demise, the stiletto was upon them. The forward sandcasters opened up, spewing a high-velocity cloud of magnetically accelerated metallic dust. It was the galactic equivalent of a shotgun blast, useless against military-grade shields, but utterly devastating to the cruiser systems of a retrofitted barge. The particles shredded sensor arrays, pitted viewports into opaque ruin, and sandblasted communication dishes into scrap, blinded and deafened. The remaining two ships began firing wildly into the nebula. Their plasma bursts were unfocused, desperate splashes of color in the dark. The stiletto danced between them, its thrusters firing in precise, short bursts, a predator toying with its panicked prey. "Their communications are in chaos," Jax reported, a grim smile touching his lips. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies. I'm picking up encrypted burst transmissions, aimed deep in Consortium space. Record everything," Rostova commanded. "Disable the portside ship. Engines and weapons only. I want it crippled, not dead." Another railgun slug, this time a smaller caliber, punched through the second Corsair's engine section, silencing it instantly. The third ship, seeing the hopelessly one-sided nature of the fight, tried to run. The stiletto let it get a head start before a volley of seeking missiles blossomed from its launch tubes, chasing the fleeing vessel down and cracking it open like a cheap nut. In less than 3 minutes, the battle was over. Silence, save for the crackle of a dying power conduit from the disabled ship, returned to the nebula. "Boarding party is ready, Captain," Jax said. "We'll secure their data core." Rostova nodded. "I'll lead it." She trusted her crew, but this was personal. She needed to see the faces of the men who had been burning her people's homes. The captured vessel was a wreck inside, the corridors filled with the metallic tang of ozone and fear. The crew, a motley collection of species bound by greed, surrendered without a fight. In the ship's computer core, Eva found what she was looking for, and more. The data vault was heavily encrypted, but humanity had learned to be very, very good at breaking things. As her tech specialist bypassed the consortium-grade security, the truth spilled out onto a flickering monitor. It wasn't just a link to the consortium, it was a direct chain of command. Encrypted manifests, payment schedules in untraceable cryptocurrency, star charts with designated ambush points for Terran shipping, and at the heart of it all, the seal of House Valerius. But there was one file, buried under layers of phantom data, that made Rostova's blood run cold. It wasn't a set of orders, it was a contingency plan, codenamed Scythefall. It detailed a coordinated, sector-wide strike against humanity's outer colonies, using a network of dozens of privateer fleets, just like this one. The attacks were meant to look like a spontaneous outpouring of piracy, a sign that the upstart Terrans couldn't protect their own borders. It was a manufactured pretext for the consortium to sweep in. offering stabilizing aid in exchange for crippling economic and political concessions. They weren't just trying to bleed humanity, they were preparing to vassalize it. And the activation date for Scythefall was in less than one standard week. Jax. Eva's voice was dangerously quiet over the comm. Get back to the Stiletto. Get the engines hot. We're leaving now. Captain, we don't just have proof. Jax, we have a timetable for an invasion. Suddenly, a proximity alert blared through the boarding party's comms. Captain Jax's voice was strained. Multiple contacts just dropped out of phase space. Consortium signatures. 1 Archon-class cruiser and 4 Lancer-class destroyers. They're hailing us. House Valerius. They must have had a kill switch or a dead man's trigger on the Corsair fleet. They knew the data core was being accessed. Rostova looked at the monitor, at the proof that could save millions of lives, then back towards the airlock. Don't answer them, she ordered, already sprinting back through the crippled ship. Blow the docking clamps and get us out of here. Evasive maneuvers. We're not fighting them. We're outrunning them. The Stiletto tore away from the derelict vessel, its engines screaming in protest as the pilot pushed them far beyond safety limits. The Consortium cruiser, a vessel 10 times their size, launched a wave of interceptor missiles. The Stiletto's point defense cannons chattered, filling the space around them with a screen of flak. But several missiles got through. The ship shuddered under the impacts, lights flickering as damage reports scrolled across Eva's command console. Hull breach in Sector Gamma. Life support is failing on decks 4 and 5. Shields are down to 40%. They're charging their main weapon, Captain A. Graviton Lance. Rostova's mind raced. They couldn't fight. They couldn't win. But they had to get the data to the Sol Compact High Command. There was only one option. Plot a phase jump. She commanded. Now to where Jax yelled over the alarms. Our drive is damaged. We can't make it all the way to Sol space. Just get us out of here. The nearest neutral system. Anywhere. The nav computer scrolled through potential destinations. Most were too far. The phase drive unable to sustain a stable corridor for that long. But one name flashed on the screen. A beacon of desperate hope, Terminus. A chaotic, lawless trading hub located in an asteroid field on the edge of the Consortium's sphere of influence. It was a wretched hive of smugglers and mercenaries, but it was neutral ground, and its dense asteroid field would make it impossible for the large Consortium ships to follow. There, Eva pointed, take us to Terminus. The Stiletto's damaged phase drive whined, a high-pitched scream of tortured metal as it bent space-time. A shimmering blue rift opened in front of the ship just as the Consortium cruiser fired its main weapon. A lance of pure gravitational distortion tore through the space where the Stiletto had been an instant before. A wave of force that would have crushed the small corvette into a sheet of metal. They were through. The jump was violent, a bone-jarring ride through the kaleidoscopic chaos of phase space. When they emerged, the silence was deafening. Alarms still blared, but the immediate threat was gone. Before them floated the ramshackle beauty of Terminus, a collection of hollowed-out asteroids and interconnected station modules, all glowing with the garish lights of commerce and sin. The crew let out a collective sigh of relief. They were alive. They had the data. But as the Stiletto limped towards the station, broadcasting a request for emergency docking, a new set of signatures appeared on the tactical display. They weren't the pursuit fleet. These ships had been waiting. A dozen sleek, white vessels, adorned with the golden sunburst of House Valerius, moved to blockade the station's primary docking bay. They powered up their weapons, their pristine hulls a stark contrast to the Stiletto's scorched and battered frame. A transmission opened on the main view screen, unrequested. It showed the face of a Consortium Archon. his features arrogant and serene. Corvette Stiletto. The Archon's voice was smooth as silk and cold as the void. You are in violation of Consortium trade sanctums. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded for customs inspection. Failure to comply will be met with terminal force. Jax stared at the screen, his face pale. They knew we were coming here. They anticipated us. Rostova looked from the blockade in front to the empty space behind, the space where she knew the hunters would soon emerge. The safe harbor had become a cage, and the wolves were at both doors. Part 2. The Archon's face on the view screen was a mask of placid superiority, the kind of expression worn by a man who had never known a moment of genuine desperation. Eva Rostova wanted to wipe it off his face with a railgun slug, but desperation was now the only currency she had left to spend. Behind them, the hunters were closing. In front, the cage was shut. They were caught in the jaws of a meticulously planned trap. He's not just giving us an ultimatum, Jax said, his voice a low growl. He's broadcasting it on open station frequencies. He's making a public spectacle of this, painting us as belligerent military trespassers. Terminus authorities won't lift a finger to help us. Rostova's gaze flickered from the Archon's face to the tactical display. The blockade was a classic Valerius formation, precise, overlapping fields of fire. No gaps, no weaknesses, but it was designed to stop a ship. People were smaller, messier, and much harder to contain. The Stiletto was a good ship, but it was just a tool. The mission was the data. Full power to the forward tractor beam emitters, she said, her voice cutting through the tension on the bridge. Target the largest rogue asteroid on our starboard side. Classification Delta 7. Jax's head snapped around. Captain, a tractor beam won't do anything against their shields. It's not for them, Eva replied, a feral glint in her eyes. Helm, give me a burn solution that slingshots us around that asteroid and puts us on a direct vector for the station's primary industrial spire. Find me the ugliest, most uninviting maintenance airlock you can. The plan crystallized in the minds of the crew in an instant. It was insane. It was suicidal. It was perfect. The navigator's fingers flew across his console. I've got it. Docking Gantry 734. It's a decommissioned ore processing intake. Big enough for us to scrape through, if we're lucky. And if we're not, Jax asked quietly, then we'll make a very impressive crater, Rostova said without a flicker of doubt. Fire control. I want our last seeking missile programmed with a proximity detonation. Target the center of the Valerius formation, but set the fuse to go off 1,000 kilometers short. It's not meant to hit them, it's meant to make them flinch. On my mark. Jax, prepare the crew for immediate ship-wide evacuees. We're abandoning her. A wave of grim understanding washed over the bridge. They were sacrificing their ship, their home. The Archon was still waiting for her reply. Eva gave him one. Mark. The Stiletto moved. Its missile pod spat out a single projectile that streaked toward the blockade fleet. Simultaneously, a shimmering blue beam of energy locked onto the Delta 7 asteroid, a chunk of iron and rock the size of a small moon. The ship's engines roared, not away from the enemy, but sideways, a violent lateral thrust that began to pull the massive asteroid with it, slowly at first, then with gathering momentum. On the Valerius flagship, the missile was an expected, almost pitiful gesture. Their point defense systems flared to life, easily targeting the incoming ordnance. But the sudden, massive gravitational distortion from the asteroid being dragged into a new trajectory was something their tactical computers had not anticipated. The rock, Captain the Valerius tactical officer would be shouting. They're pulling it into a collision course with the station. The Archon's smug expression would have vanished, replaced by a flash of disbelief and then fury. He had two choices: hold his perfect blockade and risk a multi-trillion credit asteroid impact on a major commercial hub, an incident that would trigger a political firestorm, or break formation to deal with the immediate, cruder threat. He chose the latter. Two of the Lancer-class destroyers peeled off, their engines flaring as they moved to intercept the asteroid, their tractor beams now fighting Rostova's. The perfect cage now had a hole in it. They took the bait. Jax breathed. "Helm, get us out of here," Rostova yelled. The stiletto released its hold on the asteroid and fired its main drive, slingshotting around the tumbling rock and diving toward the station. The missile they had launched detonated prematurely as planned. A flash of light and sensor noise that momentarily blinded the remaining warships. And skoy! It was the only opening they would get. The battered corvette screamed toward Terminus, alarms blaring as the hull protested the extreme G-forces. The Valerius ships, recovering their senses, opened fire. Lances of golden energy tore through the space around the stiletto, several scoring direct hits. One blast sheared off the port engine nacelle, sending the ship into a death spiral. "She's not going to make it," Captain the pilot screamed, fighting the controls. "Just get us to the door," Rostova roared back. Through the forward viewport, the industrial spire of Terminus loomed, a chaotic tangle of pipes, conduits, and docking arms. Gantry 734 was a dark maw, a square of blackness against the station's grimy hull. The stiletto hit the docking ring, not with a gentle connection, but with the force of a car crash. Metal shrieked and tore as the ship's nose crumpled, its momentum embedding it deep within the gantry. "Go, go, go," Jax bellowed. The crew, already suited up, flooded from the bridge, grabbing emergency packs and data slates. Rostova was the last to leave. Taking one final look at the command chair that had been her world, she placed a hand on the cool metal of the console. "Thank you," she whispered, before turning and running. Behind her, the stiletto's reactor, its containment field shattered by the impact, began to go critical. They scrambled through the emergency umbilical, a flexible tube that was their only bridge to the station, just as the first Valerius destroyer closed into firing range. Rostova, Jax, and the 20 surviving members of her crew spilled out onto the floor of a cavernous, zero-gravity processing bay. The air was thick with the smell of ozone, hot metal, and something acridly chemical. A moment later, a blinding white light filled the umbilical behind them, followed by a concussive blast that ripped it from its moorings. The stiletto had died, taking the entire gantry and the foremost destroyer with it in a spectacular fusion explosion. They were inside. They were alive. And they were utterly, completely stranded. Terminus was not a place. It was an organism. A cacophony of 100 languages assaulted them as they made their way from the industrial sector into the station's populated rings. The corridors were a river of beings hulking. 4 armed dockworkers from the Jovian shipyards, slender, insectoid traders from the Cygnus arm, and consortium humans with cybernetics gleaming under the neon signs that flickered in a dozen different dialects. Drones zipped overhead, delivering everything from narcotics to noodles, their repulsor lifts whining. The air was a soup of recycled oxygen, exotic spices, and unidentifiable waste. Rostova's crew, in their crisp, black Sol compact uniforms, stood out like a sore thumb. "First things first," Eva said, her voice low as she pulled her team into a grimy alcove. "We need to disappear." They traded their uniforms for local attire with a black market clothier, exchanging military-grade precision for the anonymity of worn leather, patched synth fabric, and hooded cloaks. The data slate containing the Scythefall intelligence was sealed in a shielded case, now carried by Jax. Consortium comms are buzzing. Their tech officer, a young woman named Kenna, reported, her eyes glued to a handheld scanner. House Valerius has officially labeled us as terrorists. They've put a price on our heads. 50 million credits for you, Captain. 10 for the rest of us, dead or alive. That's flattering. Jax grumbled, pulling his hood lower. Every bounty hunter on Terminus will be crawling out of the woodwork, which is why we can't stay here, Rostova said. We need a way to transmit the data, a long-range, encrypted comm system, something that can cut through consortium jamming and reach high command. The station's primary array is out of the question, Kenna said immediately. The governor here is practically a Valerius employee. They'll have it locked down tight. Then we need something off the books. Ava decided. A black site, a smuggler's relay. There has to be someone on this station who deals in secure, untraceable communication. There was only one name that came to mind. A ghost from the intelligence briefings. A legend in the underworld. A man known only as Kalen. He was a former Sol Compact intelligence analyst who had gone rogue years ago, selling secrets to the highest bidder before vanishing into the galactic fringe. Rumor had it he operated a data haven here on Terminus, a place where information was the only true king. Finding him would be their only chance. Their search led them deep into the station's underbelly, a labyrinth of decaying maintenance tunnels and forgotten sublevels known as the Sumpi. Here, the neon glow of the upper rings was replaced by the flickering emergency lights and the drip of foul-smelling condensation from weeping pipes. It was a place where the unwanted dregs of the galaxy came to hide. They found Kalen's supposed safe house in a defunct water reclamation plant. The entrance was a single, reinforced blast door, unmarked and uninviting. Eva signaled for the others to stand back as she keyed the access panel. A synthesized voice crackled to life. State your business or be recycled. We're here to make a withdrawal from the information bank, Eva said, using an old intelligence code phrase. We have a new deposit, high value, consortium grade. There was a long silence, filled only with the hum of the door's internal mechanisms. Then, a heavy clank as maglocks disengaged. The door hissed open. The man inside was not what she expected. He was older, his face a roadmap of scars and cynicism, but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. He sat behind a desk cluttered with ancient, hard-wired computer terminals, a stark contrast to the sleek, holographic interfaces of the modern era. He held a heavy, old-fashioned slug-thrower pistol in his hand, its barrel pointed steadily at Eva's chest. "You've got guts? I'll give you that," Kalen said, his voice a dry rasp. "Walking into my parlor with the entire Valerius house on your tail. Whatever you're carrying must be one hell of a story." "It's a declaration of war," Jack said, stepping forward and placing the shielded case on the desk. Kalen's eyes flickered to the case, then back to Rostova. He gestured with the pistol. "Show me." Kenna worked quickly, decrypting the case and projecting the core files of Scythefall into the air. Kalen watched, his expression unreadable, as the plans for the sector-wide assault unfolded. He saw the fleet designations, the attack vectors, the economic projections for a subjugated Terran state. For a long minute after the presentation ended, he was silent. Then he let out a low, humorless chuckle and set the pistol down on the desk. "Well, you bastards finally did it," he mused, more to himself than to them. "You kicked the hornet's nest so hard the whole damn tree is coming down." He looked at Rostova, his gaze appraising. You think you can just broadcast this the moment you try to punch a signal that powerful through the local network. Valerius will triangulate your position in seconds. Their enforcers will be here before your first data packet clears the asteroid field. We need your help, Eva stated simply. Your network, your expertise. My network is for hiding, not shouting, Kalen countered. But there is another way. He swiveled in his chair and gestured to a large schematic of Terminus projected on one of his monitors. The station has a heart, an old, decommissioned stellar forge in the industrial core they call the Foundry. It's powered by a contained singularity. The entire area is flooded with so much gravitational and electromagnetic interference that no one goes near it. But he zoomed in on a small, forgotten structure attached to the forge's outer shell. The original builders installed a deep space comms relay there, a neutrino pulse transmitter. It's ancient, obsolete, and completely off the official station grid. If you can get to it and power it up, you could send your message. It's untraceable. The signal would be lost in the singularity's background noise. What's the catch? Jax asked, his suspicion palpable. Kalen's smile was thin and sharp. The catch is that the Foundry is now home to the Forged. It's a cult of cybernetic zealots who worship the singularity as a god. They see all organic life as a corruption. They don't take kindly to visitors. And right now, he tapped a key, and a new window popped up, showing live security feeds from the SUMP's main transit hub. A squad of House Valerius Praetorian Guard just entered the level, armed for war and asking questions about some well-dressed humans. Your time is running out. Rostova looked at the schematic, at the impossible path to the Foundry, then at the live feed of the elite soldiers hunting them. The cage had just gotten a whole lot smaller and infinitely more dangerous. Part 3, Kalen's face, illuminated by the flickering security feed, was a mask of detached interest. He was a historian watching a forgotten conflict play out, not a participant. The Praetorian Guard, he said, his voice a dry rustle of old secrets. House Valerius's personal boogeymen, genetically augmented, cybernetically enhanced, and fanatically loyal. They don't arrest people, Captain. They collect assets and sterilize problems. You are now officially a problem. Eva's eyes were fixed on the screen, watching the squad of 7 white-armored soldiers move through the SUMP's transit hub with an inhuman efficiency. They moved like a single organism, weapons held low, their golden visors sweeping the environment, processing data far faster than any normal human could. How do we avoid them? She asked, her voice tight. You don't, Kalen replied with a shrug. You delay them. The SUMP is a maze. I can guide you through the old service corridors, the ones that aren't on the official station schematics, but they'll be on yours. They'll adapt. They'll hunt. Your only advantage is that you're desperate, and they're arrogant. He tapped a few keys, Boitsi, and a pathfinding overlay appeared on Eva's datapad. A green line snaked through a web of forgotten tunnels. This route will get you to the Foundry's outer perimeter. It's a long, ugly walk. I suggest you start now. He leaned back, his part in the drama seemingly over. And, Captain, he added, as they turned to leave, try not to bleed all over my welcome mat on your way back. Assuming there is a way back. The chase was a nightmare of rusted metal and oppressive darkness. Kalen's voice was a ghost in their ear, a disembodied guide through a world that had been left to rot. Left at the next junction. Watch for the collapsed floor plate 40 meters ahead. Go dark. Thermal patrol sweeping the corridor above you. The Praetorians were relentless. The crew could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of their power armor echoing through the vents. feel the vibrations of their heavy, measured steps through the deck plates. They weren't rushing, they were herding their prey, methodically cutting off escape routes, boxing them in. They reached a massive ventilation hub, a cylindrical chamber hundreds of meters high, crisscrossed with maintenance catwalks. The foundry was on the other side. "This is the choke point," Jax whispered, his pulse rifle held tight. "They have to follow us through here." "They're expecting it," Eva countered, her mind racing. She pointed to a series of massive coolant pipes running along the chamber wall. "Kenna, can you overload the pressure regulators on those pipes?" Kenna's eyes went wide. "I can." But the resulting blast would vent superheated plasma coolant across this entire chamber. It would flash boil anyone caught in the open. "That's the idea," Eva said grimly. "Jax, you and I will draw their fire. The rest of you, get across that catwalk. Now." It was a desperate gamble. Eva and Jax took positions behind a large piece of industrial machinery as the rest of the crew sprinted across the exposed catwalk. As predicted, the white armored figures appeared at the entrance to the chamber, their weapons instantly locking onto the fleeing targets. Bright lances of plasma fire erupted, coring the metal of the catwalk, forcing the crew to dive for cover on the far side. But the distraction worked. The Praetorians, focused on the obvious targets, advanced into the chamber. "Now!" Eva screamed into her comm. From her safe position, Kenna bypassed the pipe safety protocols. A warning siren began to blare, a futile, automated scream in the darkness. A low groan emanated from the pipes as the pressure built to impossible levels. The Praetorians recognized the threat instantly. They turned, their movement still economical and precise, even in retreat. But it was too late. A seam on the largest pipe split open, and a wave of incandescent blue-white vapor roared into the chamber. It wasn't an explosion. It was a silent, instantaneous wave of absolute heat. The Praetorians were engulfed. Their advanced armor held for a moment, its ablative surface glowing cherry red, then white hot, before it failed. Eva didn't watch them die. She and Jax were already running, their boots clanging on the catwalk, the searing heat at their backs. They made it across Dimdiets, sealing the blast door behind them just as the chamber became a roaring furnace. They hadn't killed them all. 2 had been far enough back to survive the initial blast, but they had bought themselves time. The path forward descended into a new kind of hell. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with static electricity that made the hairs on their arms stand up. A deep, subsonic hum vibrated through their bones, a constant, oppressive presence. The graffiti on the walls changed from common curses to intricate, unsettling geometric patterns, symbols that seemed to writhe in their peripheral vision. They had reached the domain of the forged. The entrance to the foundry wasn't a door, but a wound in the station's architecture, a cavernous opening that led into a space dominated by a terrifying spectacle. In the center of the vast chamber, suspended in a web of magnetic containment fields and energy conduits, was the singularity. It was a perfect sphere of non-existence, a hole in reality that warped the light around it, creating a halo of shimmering, distorted starlight. The chamber was lit by this stolen light and the hellish orange glow of molten metal pouring through ancient industrial channels. And everywhere, there were figures. The forged. They were not an army, they were a congregation. Some stood motionless, their heads bowed toward the singularity. Others crawled along the machinery like spiders, their metallic limbs clicking and scraping. They were grotesque parodies of the human form, their flesh fused with rusted industrial parts, a hydraulic piston for an arm, a cluster of optical sensors for a head, a speaker grill that emitted a low, distorted chant where a mouth should be. They were praying. "My God," one of the crew members whispered in horror. "What are they?" "They're what happens when faith and machinery have a child," Jax muttered, his hand tightening on his weapon. "The comms relay is on that spire," Eva said, pointing to a tall, needle-like structure that rose near the Singularity's containment ring. "We have to cross their altar." They moved slowly, hugging the shadows at the edge of the chamber, their movements quiet and deliberate. The Forged seemed to ignore them, lost in their ecstatic worship of the black hole at the center of their world. But as the crew reached the base of the access gantry that led to the relay, one of the figures turned. Was larger than the others, his body a hulking amalgamation of a cargo loader's chassis and what might have once been a human torso. A single, glowing red optic fixed on them. It let out a shriek, not of alarm, but of righteous fury. A burst of static and binary code that echoed through the chamber. Heresy, flesh, corruption. In an instant, the congregation turned. Their silent worship was replaced by a singular, violent purpose. They surged forward, a tide of screeching metal and corrupted flesh. Plasma cutters ignited, hydraulic claws snapped, and rivet guns fired with deadly accuracy. The battle was chaotic and brutal. The crew's pulse rifles tore through the Forged's weaker members. For every one that fell, 2 more took its place. They didn't use tactics. They were a wave of fanatical self-sacrifice, throwing themselves at the intruders, their only goal to purge the unbelievers from their holy site. To the spire, Rostova yelled, laying down a line of suppressing fire. "Kenna, Jax, with me, the rest of you, hold them off for as long as you can." It was a death sentence, and she knew it. But the mission was everything. She, Jax, and Kenna fought their way up the gantry, the sounds of the desperate battle below fading into a chorus of screams and tearing metal. They reached the relay platform, a small, circular space perched precariously over the swirling gravitational vortex of the Singularity. The neutrino transmitter was an archaic beast, a console of thick, hardened metal and glowing vacuum tubes. Kenna threw herself at the control, her fingers flying as she bypassed centuries of decay to access its core systems. Below, the last of their crew was overwhelmed. Eva watched in horror as the Forged swarmed them, a wave of metallic bodies washing over their last stand. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to turn away. Their sacrifice had to mean something. "I'm in," Kenna shouted over the din. "But the system is dead. The main power conduit was severed. I can't power it from here." "Then find another way," Eva roared. Jax stood guard at the top of the gantry, firing down at the Forged who were now beginning to climb, their clawed limbs finding purchase on the metal latticework. "They're coming." "Captain," suddenly, a new sound cut through the chaos. A voice, amplified and resonant, a chorus of synthesized tones that seemed to emanate from the very structure of the foundry. "The mouth of God has been silent for an age. Your words are a fleeting noise in the great quiet." A massive figure emerged from the shadows near the Singularity's containment ring. It was different from the others. Where they were crude and rusted was a masterpiece of dark engineering. Its form was sleek, polished black metal fused with sculpted biomechanics, and it stood easily twice the height of a man. In one hand, it held a massive thermal lance that glowed with contained heat. Its head was a complex array of lenses and sensors, all focused on the 3 humans on the platform. "I need a direct power source," Kenna said, her voice trembling with desperation. "A massive one. Something that can jumpstart the entire system." The giant zealot took a step onto the gantry, the metal groaning under its weight. "You seek to speak into the darkness," the synthesized voice boomed. "But the darkness speaks only for itself. Your flesh is an impurity. Surrender it to the forge, and find absolution in the coming silence." Iva looked from the advancing horror to the dead console, and then to the singularity itself. A sphere of infinite gravity and infinite power, held in check just meters away. An idea, born of pure, suicidal desperation, sparked in her mind. "Kenna," she said, her voice eerily calm, "can you reconfigure the relay's intake manifold to draw power directly from the singularity's containment field?" Kenna stared at her as if she were insane. "Captain, the feedback would be catastrophic. It would either vaporize us or rip the entire relay apart. We don't have the equipment to regulate that kind of raw power. I'm not asking you to regulate it," Eva said, her eyes locked on the approaching cult leader. "I'm asking you to open the floodgates." Part 4. There was no time for debate. Kenna, her face pale in the eerie, warped light of the singularity, gave a singled, sharp nod. Her fingers weren't typing. They were performing surgery on a dying god. She ripped a maintenance panel off the console, exposing a thick bundle of primary power conduits, ignoring the screaming proximity alarms and the wail of dying capacitors. She began to manually reroute the flow, forcing the ancient system to drink from a river of fire. On the gantry, Jax met the charge of the forged leader. The zealot was surprisingly fast for its size, its metallic limbs carrying it forward with an inexorable momentum. Its thermal lance swung, not a cut, but a wave of shimmering heat that vaporized a section of the catwalk's guardrail. Jax dove, rolling under the attack, and came up firing, his pulse rifle rounds, designed to punch through military-grade armor, spattered against the zealot's polished black chassis, leaving only scorched, shallow divots. It was like throwing rocks at a fortress. "Flesh is temporary," the synthesized voice boomed, a chorus of cold logic and fanaticism. "The structure endures. Your resistance is a flaw in the design." Jax didn't waste time replying. He changed tactics, his years of brutal close-quarters combat taking over. He wasn't trying to kill it, he was trying to cripple it. He aimed for the joints, the complex articulation points where polished metal met synthetic muscle fiber. His shots found their mark, and the zealot faltered for a half-second, its right leg seizing. It was the only opening he needed. He rushed forward, sliding under the zealot's reach, and slammed a magnetic limpet mine onto the back of its knee joint. "Flawed," the voice hissed as it tried to turn, its damaged leg dragging. The mine detonated with a sharp crack, shattering the joint and sending the zealot crashing to one knee. But it was far from finished. It braced itself with one hand and swung its thermal lance in a low, vicious arc. Jax leaped backward, but the edge of the heat wave caught his leg. His combat suit's armor flared and blackened, and he cried out as the flesh beneath was flash-cooked. He landed hard, his leg useless, dragging himself back toward the platform. On the console, Kenna screamed, "I'm opening the manifold, brace yourselves." Eva watched the power gauge on the transmitter spike, the needle breaking past every safety warning and burying itself in the red. The entire platform began to shudder violently. A low hum escalated into a deafening roar as the relay, a piece of forgotten technology, began to draw raw energy from the singularity's containment field. Blue-white arcs of lightning, tendrils of pure cosmic force, leaped from the containment ring to the relay's intake, bathing the platform in an unholy light. The singularity itself seemed to react. The space around it warped more intensely, and a low, mournful tone echoed through the chamber, a sound that felt older than stars. The wounded zealot. still on one knee, paused. Its optical sensors tilted upward, as if in awe or horror. You profane the heart of silence. You give voice to the great emptiness. It's powered, Kenna yelled, her hand shielding her eyes from the blinding light. But the system is overloading. The data buffer is already starting to degrade. You've got seconds. Captain Eva jammed the data slate into the console's interface. The upload began, a torrent of information. The consortium's darkest secret pouring into the transmitter's energized core. She could feel the data flowing, a physical pressure against her mind. The weight of millions of lives condensed into a stream of light. Jax, gritting his teeth against the pain in his leg, provided the last line of defense. The zealot, enraged, began to drag itself forward, its single functioning leg and powerful arms pulling its bulk across the gantry. It raised its thermal lance for a final, killing blow. Just as it prepared to fire, the overload cascade began. With a final, deafening shriek of tortured metal, the neutrino transmitter exploded, but it wasn't a conventional blast. It was an outward pulse of pure, unstructured energy, a wave of raw information and gravimetric distortion. The wave hit Rostova, Kenna, and Jax, throwing them against the far railing of the platform. It felt like being hit by a ghost train, a physical impact that left no wound but rattled their very atoms. For the zealot, it was annihilation, the god it worshipped. Its power funneled into a weapon by the very flesh it despised, turned on it. The energy wave struck its chassis, and the intricate machine being was unmade. Its systems overloaded, its biocomponents flash vaporized, and its metal frame was torn apart by the gravimetric shear. The mouth of God was silenced, its last utterance a burst of white noise. The feedback loop from the explosion traveled back along the energy tendrils to the Singularity's containment field. The entire foundry groaned, the sound of a dying leviathan. Sections of the ceiling began to collapse, and the molten metal channels cracked, spilling their fiery contents onto the chamber floor. The forged below, their leader destroyed and their holy sanctum desecrated, screeched in a unified chorus of agony and rage before they were consumed by falling debris and rivers of slag. The message was sent. Eva clung to the railing, her ears ringing, watching the chaos unfold below. The cost had been everything. Her ship, her crew, but they had done it. A crackle in her comms unit startled her. It was Kalen. His voice was no longer calm and detached. It was laced with panic. Rostova. What in the hell did you do? That pulse wasn't a signal. It was a goddamn solar flare. You didn't just knock on Sol's door. You blew the whole front of the house off. Did the message get through? Eva rasped, her throat raw. Oh, it got through. Kalen's voice was strained. And it went everywhere else. I'll too. You sent out an omnidirectional neutrino burst. Every long-range sensor in this sector just lit up like a festival. My entire network is fried. The station's core power is fluctuating. You didn't just send a message, Captain. You fired a flare. A very, very big one. The implications of his words settled over her like a shroud. They hadn't sent a scalpel. They had detonated a bomb. Every faction, every bounty hunter, every ship with a working sensor array now knew that something had happened in the heart of Terminus. Jax pushed himself up, his face slick with sweat. So we're not sneaking out of here, are we? Before Eva could answer, Kenna pointed a trembling finger toward the chamber entrance. The furnace-like glow from the coolant chamber they had sabotaged was gone, replaced by the cool, white light of military-grade searchlights. Two figures stood silhouetted against the light, their armor scorched but intact. The surviving Praetorians. They had been delayed, not stopped, and behind them, a new set of figures was emerging. These weren't consortium soldiers. They wore the rough, piecemeal armor of station security, their weapons drawn, and behind them, others, figures in the shadows, their cybernetic eyes glowing red, bounty hunters, mercenaries, scavengers. The entire station was descending on the foundry, drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of a massive payday. Kalen's voice was a final, grim epitaph in their ears. The Valerius bounty is still active, Captain. But now you've got a new problem. You've woken the station, and Terminus always collects its debts. They were trapped, wounded, exhausted, and out of miracles. The path behind them was blocked by the station's rabble, and the path forward was a pit of fire and collapsing metal, with the two remaining Praetorians advancing through the smoke like ghosts of vengeance. Part 5. The universe had shrunk to a single, collapsing platform. In front, the two Praetorians advanced through the shimmering heat haze, their white armor now stained with soot and ash, making them look like avenging angels fallen into hell. Behind, the entrance was a churning mass of opportunists, their greed momentarily checked by the unknown horrors of the foundry. For a heartbeat, there was a perfect, terrible silence, the eye of a storm made of fire and desperation. Then Kalen's voice, raw with static and fury, cut through their comms. You owe me a new data haven, Rostova. But I'm not writing off this debt until I collect. I'm triggering a cascading systems failure in this sector. Containment breaches, atmospheric vents, the works. It'll scatter the rats at your back. It'll also turn this entire level into a vacuum in about 10 minutes. I have a ship, a relic I keep for rainy days, in a blind spot hangar bay, 3 levels down. Your data pad now has the route. If you're not there in 9 minutes, I'm leaving. A new schematic blazed to life on Eva's wrist-mounted display, a frantic red line tracing a path through the station's guts. It wasn't a path. It was a suicide run. What about them, Eva asked, her gaze locked on the two approaching Praetorians. They're your problem, Kalen snapped. Give them a good chase. The more chaos you create, the better my odds of getting away clean. Don't disappoint me. The connection died. A moment later, the entire station screamed. Emergency klaxons blared, crimson lights strobed through the smoke, and a synthesized voice, calm and apocalyptic, began announcing imminent atmospheric failure. The mob at the entrance faltered. Greed warred with self-preservation, and self-preservation won. The horde dissolved, its members scrambling back toward the transit hubs, a stampede of panicked self-interest. Their exit was clear, but the Praetorians didn't even flinch. Their mission wasn't driven by profit. It was a sacrament. The asset will be secured, one of them transmitted on an open frequency, its voice a flat, synthesized declaration. The failure will be sterilized. Go! Eva yelled at Kenna and Jax. Get to the access conduit at the far end of the chamber. I'll buy you time, Jax. Leaning heavily on Kenna, hesitated. Eva, don't. That's an order. Lieutenant, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. She turned to face her hunters. She was the asset. She was the failure. This was her fight. As Kenna helped Jack stagger toward the designated escape route, Eva broke into a run, not away, but deeper into the collapsing foundry. She vaulted over a pool of molten slag, her boots sinking slightly into the cooling crust, and scrambled up a pile of debris. The Praetorians followed, their movements fluid and economical, closing the distance with terrifying speed. She wasn't faster. She wasn't stronger. She had to be smarter. She led them on a chase through a graveyard of dying machinery, past the cracking containment ring of the singularity. The gravitational pull was a physical force now, a tide that tugged at her, making her movements feel sluggish and heavy. The Praetorians, Dressel, with their powered armor, seemed less affected, their mechanized strides compensating for the distortion. One of them fired, not a plasma bolt, but a grapple line that shot past her and embedded itself in a girder ahead. It reeled itself in to its off-at speed doubling. Eva ducked into the shadow of a colossal, tilting smelting vat. She had one limpet mine left, the one she hadn't used on the Zealot. As the first Praetorian swung past her, she slapped the mine onto the grapple line's taut cable. The resulting explosion didn't destroy the Praetorian, but it snapped the line. Its forward momentum, no longer guided, sent it careening into the vat's support structure. The massive container, already weakened by the foundry's collapse, groaned and then tore free from its moorings. It toppled over, unleashing a tidal wave of liquid fire. The Praetorian was consumed, its white armor vanishing into the incandescent orange torrent without a sound. One left. The final Praetorian didn't hesitate. It leaped through the river of slag, landing on the other side, its armor glowing with heat, but intact. It raised its weapon. Eva was out of tricks, her rifle empty, her body screaming with exhaustion. She stood her ground, ready to meet the end. But the end didn't come from the Praetorian's rifle. It came from below. The floor beneath the final hunter, weakened by the heat and stressed by the landing, gave way. The Praetorian dropped from sight with a startled burst of static. For a moment, Eva thought it was over. Then a white gauntlet appeared, its fingers digging into the broken edge of the floor. The Praetorian began to pull itself up, its single-minded devotion overriding all else. Eva looked at the struggling figure, then at the singularity. An idea, cold and absolute, formed in her mind. She walked to the edge of the chasm and looked down. The Praetorian's golden visor tilted up to meet her gaze. She held out her hand. It was an absurd gesture. A truce. A surrender the Praetorian. Its logic circuits likely struggling to process the irrational human act. Paused. It was the only hesitation she needed. She took a step back, turned, and ran. Not away from the hole, but directly toward the Singularity's containment ring. The Praetorian, its primary mission objective now running toward an even greater danger, pulled itself from the hole with a surge of power and gave chase. Eva ran until the gravitational pull was so strong she felt like she was moving through water. The light from the stars trapped around the Singularity's event horizon painted her face in swirling, impossible colors. She could feel her atoms vibrating, resonating with the raw power just meters away. She threw a look over her shoulder. The Praetorian was just behind her, its hand outstretched. She planted her feet, spun, and dropped to the deck. The Praetorian, its momentum carrying it forward into the intensified gravity well, couldn't stop. It stumbled past her, its arms windmilling as it fought for balance. For a single frozen moment, it teetered on the edge of the maintenance platform, a perfect soldier fighting an unwinnable war against physics. Then it fell. It didn't scream. The only sound was the shriek of its armor being torn apart as it was pulled into the Singularity, stretched into a thread of light and information before vanishing into the absolute nothingness at the heart of the foundry. Eva dragged herself away from the edge, her lungs burning, and followed the escape route. She found Jax and Kenna waiting by a large, circular maintenance conduit, its cover pried open. Without a word with HFY, they slid inside, one after another, into a chute that smelled of rust and decay. They tumbled down 3 levels, then a chaotic, bruising slide in the dark, before being spat out into a small, silent hangar bay. A ship was waiting. It was ugly. A cobbled-together freighter with mismatched panels and a sputtering engine, but it was the most beautiful thing Eva had ever seen. Kalen stood at the open cargo ramp, his expression impatient. "Cutting it close," he grumbled as they stumbled aboard. "Let's go." The freighter lifted off just as the hangar's blast doors buckled inward. They cleared terminus space as a series of secondary explosions rocked the station's industrial ring. In the silence of the cockpit, they watched the chaotic, lawless hub recede on the view screen. "So what happens now?" Jax asked, his voice barely a whisper. Kalen brought up a series of data streams on the main screen. "This happens," he said. The Scythefall data was everywhere. News feeds, public forums, corporate intelligence networks. It wasn't an accusation anymore. It was a fact. House Valerius is in freefall. Kalen explained, a hint of professional admiration in his voice. Their stock has collapsed. Their political allies are abandoning them. The other consortium houses are circling like predators, carving up Valerius contracts and territories. You didn't just stop a war, Captain. You started a much bigger, much more profitable one. A priority signal from the Sol Compact flashed on the screen. It was an official commendation, a full pardon for any collateral damage. A hero's welcome was waiting for them. Eva looked at the message, then at the image of the consortium tearing itself apart. They had won. Humanity was safe. But she felt no triumph, only the immense, crushing weight of the cost. The galaxy she had fought to protect was now more volatile, more dangerous than ever before. She hadn't brought peace. She had just shattered an old order, leaving a vacuum that something new, and possibly worse, would rush to fill. "Take us to the border," she told Kalen, ignoring the official summons. "Drop us at the nearest patrol fleet." He raised an eyebrow. "Not going home to get your medals. We're soldiers, not politicians." Eva said, looking at the faces of Jax and Kenna, the only family she had left. "There's a new board now, and the pieces are all in motion. Our war isn't over." Kalen smirked, a genuine, rare expression. "Good," he said, turning the ship toward the distant bright star that was Sol. It was starting to get boring around here anyway. Humanity had arrived, not with the quiet dignity of a new guest at the Galactic table, but by kicking down the door and setting the feast on fire. The old empires had learned their lesson. You don't trifle with a species that has nothing to lose, because they will burn down your entire world just to light their way home.